Hello, Argyle ISD community. We spent several months last year educating our community and urging you to take part in legislative advocacy at the state level. Despite the Texas legislature meeting for 5 sessions in 2023, our leaders have failed to agree on legislation that would fully fund Texas public schools. We need action, and we need it now.
Please join us in asking our legislators to prioritize public education funding. Did you know that according to Ed Week 2021 and Raise Your Hand Texas, that Texas ranks 42nd in the country in per student state public education funding? That is $4,000 per student behind the national average. Did you know the state funding formula has not changed since 2019, despite record inflation since that time? In the face of the sharp rise in costs of everything from fuel to insurance to utilities, state funding has lagged behind, leaving schools to bear the brunt of the shortfall. Did you know our legislature had a record surplus during the 88th regular session and met again for 4 additional special sessions, but did not pass an increase in public K-12 funding in Texas? Despite the many times Argyle ISD and our community spent reaching out to our legislators to let them know how desperate the need is. Did you know the state is withholding $4 billion in already approved funding for public school children in Texas? Without an increase in state funding, school districts, including Argyle ISD, will have to consider additional budget reductions. Specifically, Argyle ISD is one of the few districts in the state that has received the Formula Transition Grant since 2019 and faces a significant funding cliff beginning this school year. Argyle ISD is subject to losing approximately $250,000 in local property tax revenue via the Robin Hood formula of recapture to be paid back to the state. And Argyle ISD, like most school districts in Texas, is struggling to provide meaningful raises to our teachers. In June, our Board of Trustees approved a one-time retention stipend for all employees, which is a very different plan than years past, when the district was able to give on average 3% raises each year. Speaking of our amazing teachers, a February 2023 Governor Teacher Texas Vacancy Task Force report emphasized the importance of taking care of our teachers here in Texas, calling classroom teachers, and I quote, the most important factor in a child's academic success. This report found that salary increases are not keeping up with high inflation rates and suggested in the report a significant increase in overall teacher salaries by increasing the basic allotment. On top of all of this, Argyle ISD's budget is impacted by underfunded mandates from the state. Our district is projected to spend 154% more than the special education state allotment in order to meet the needs of our special ed program requirements. To meet the new safety requirements, AISD is projected to spend 367% more than the state allotment because safety and security have been and will continue to be a priority in AISD. The state must provide funding for the sustainability of the programs it mandates. So where does that leave us right now? In late July, state leadership issued instructions to state agencies to kick off the first step in the upcoming appropriations process for the 89th legislative session. Governor Greg Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick issued a joint letter outlining their instructions and priorities. Speaker Dave Phelan issued a similar but different letter individually. The primary difference between the two letters was that Abbott and Patrick gave the instructions, and I quote, legislative appropriations request should take into consideration that priorities for the next Appropriations Act will include property tax relief, additional funding to support construction and modernization of dispatchable electric generating facilities, operational funding for the mental health facilities authorized by the 88th legislature, and funding for educational savings accounts and securing the border. Phelan's letter omitted some of the specifics in the paragraph above and instead stated, quote, While I am confident the next budget will prioritize critical items such as additional property tax relief and border security, it will ultimately be up to all members of the legislature to determine the spending priorities next season. This issuance of instructions is but the first step in a long process toward developing and adopting the 2026-27 state budget. Do you notice what I notice? Appropriately funding public education for Texas children was not listed, and we are at a gridlock. According to a recent analysis of the Legislative Budget Board by Moat Casey, inflation-adjusted state and local revenue funding per ADA is currently projected to drop nearly $1,460 per student compared to what schools received in fiscal year 2020, the first year of House Bill 3. In August, legislative committees began hearings in Austin to prepare for the 89th Texas State Legislative Session that will commence in January. The House Public Education Committee and Senate Finance Committee are already on the calendar to meet regarding education savings accounts, also known as vouchers, and property tax relief, but not public school funding. Regardless of what happens with the voucher debate next legislative session, public education leaders and community members must continue to show state lawmakers the impact their inaction is having on school budgets. Ask our representatives to prioritize legislation that gets funds to public schools where they are desperately needed. Ours begins now. The first day legislators and legislators-elect may file bills for the 89th legislature is November 11th, and the 89th legislative session convenes in Austin on January 14th, 2025.
Visit takeactionargyle.com and take just a moment to submit a pre-written letter or make a phone call. You could even write your own, which will be automatically delivered to our state representatives, asking them to support legislation that could increase funding for Texas public schools.